Hello and welcome to EZRA Asks, where each episode we at EZRA invite a special guest and leading thinker to help us grapple with a question related to the world of work and professional development. My name is Jonathan Passmore, and I'm the Senior Vice President and Professor of Coaching at EZRA. Today our question is, what can we all learn from elite athletes? We'll be diving into related topics like how do events such as the 2012 Games make an impact? What challenges did the pandemic bring? And how can athletes be a source of inspiration for us all? To help us answer some of these questions, I have the pleasure of being joined by Mike Sharrock. Mike has had a 30-year international career with BP in roles across Vietnam, the Netherlands and Benelux. He led BP's partnership with London 2012 and the Glasgow Commonwealth Games in 2014. He was appointed Chief Executive of the British Paralympic Association in 2019, overseeing the Games in Tokyo. Mike, welcome to the show. What brought you here today?
I think it's probably the Paralympics, really. Although I'm no longer directly involved in the Paralympics, it has been a huge part of my life for the last 16 years. And when we're talking here about difference and about disability, I think the Paralympics is something that sort of stands out as an example of what can be achieved and what is possible if you take away the barriers that often hold people back.
So first of all, tell us about what's your superpower?
My superpower? I believe the best in people. I think it's a very important part of the coaching that I do as well. I believe generally everyone's trying to do their best. And I also believe that everybody has the capacity to grow and the capacity to develop more of themselves and develop more of their capability. And that, for me, is a very important principle in my coaching.
And when you think about your career, how have you brought that alive in your career?
I've always tried to make that part of what I do. I love working with teams. I love working with people. And I think the idea of good business and good leadership is to help those that you're working with to grow as much as they can. So it's always been an important part of it.
So we in the show also like to do a quick fire round. So
Okay.
a few quick fire questions to get us going then. Tea or coffee?
Tea first thing and then coffee.
Summer or winter games?
Summer.
Team sports or individual sports?
Team.
Coaching or mentoring?
Coaching.
So let's now step into some questions about your career that brought you to being the Chief Executive of the British Paralympic Association. You started your career working with BP. Tell us about how your career started out with BP.
Okay, well, the first thing to say is I'm no longer the CEO of the British Paralympic Association. As you know, I stepped down over a year ago. So BP, yes. I mean, I was felt very fortunate to have a job. I left university and was very surprised that anybody wanted to hire me. But BP was appealing because I really liked the idea of an international career, and it didn't disappoint. I mean, I had some wonderful experiences there, and at the age of 24, I was in Shanghai for a couple of years. Fascinating time as China was just coming out of that long period of isolation. At that time, there were only 100 Westerners living in Shanghai, so just a very, very different world. Indonesia was what came next. 3 years working in the jungles of Sumatra and exploring for gold in Borneo, where it took 2 flights and a 6-hour motorboat trip to get to work. So all of those experiences, I think, have given me gave me a sense of the differences that exist out there, and I think that's something that's fascinated me. It's been a theme through my life, and something that I still hold very true in my coaching is that how different we all are, and differences are there to be celebrated. So yes, so I've been very lucky in doing some of the things that I've done.
And you then got involved with BP and the 2012 Games. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, again, I was very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I was MD for BP in the Netherlands. I'd been there for 6 years, and I knew that BP was in the process of becoming a partner of the London Games. And so when the opportunity came up to step in and run that team, I jumped at it. The idea of being part of such an enormous thing was just really exciting. But of course, I had no idea. So I was lucky to get that opportunity, but I had no idea, nor did any of us in BP really, how you go about activating a partnership of that scale with the Olympics and Paralympics. So the first thing I did was to head off to Beijing. The timing worked. I went off to the Olympics in Beijing and managed to get a ticket from a guy outside the stadium and watch Usain Bolt get his 200-meter world record. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing. But then I went back 2 weeks later to the Paralympics, and it really blew me away. I think there was something about the Paralympics that connected at a deeper level with me, and I think that was the thing that it was the moment for me where I realized that, wow, this is going to be so big in 4 years' time. And so we put the Paralympics right at the heart of what we did. I think there's something about I remember when I went to Beijing and I was watching the Paralympics, and I was initially quite preoccupied with the different disabilities and how you can have people with apparently different impairments competing against one another. You saw it very much in the swimming. But then I found after a day or two, I was just thinking about the sport. I mean, it was just incredible sport. And it really touched me. And I went into the athletes' village and into the food hall and watched everybody in there. And it was just the same as it had been during the Olympics, exactly the same. And I realized my preconceptions were being challenged. My prejudices about what people can and can't do were being challenged. And so it really had a big impact on me. And so I've been a huge supporter, passionate about the Paralympics since 2008. It's been a big part of my life.
And as you think about 2012, what were some of the challenges that you then faced in working in the 2012 Games?
Well, the first thing, as I mentioned, we didn't really know what we were doing. So we surrounded ourselves with people that did. And I pulled this amazing team of people together with real expertise about the Olympics and Paralympics. So I started with a team of 2 in 2008, and by games time in 2012, we had over 1,000 people on the team, including the top 200 in BP, whose job it was to host our guests, and they all needed to be trained, and so it was an incredible team drawn from lots of different agencies, but all of whom wanted to be there. I of course, heading up a team involved in London 2012 was, it was a huge privilege, but it was also something that everybody wanted to be part of. So I'd never been so popular, which is, of course, it stopped as soon as I moved from that job. But it was incredible, and I think there's something about the Olympics and Paralympics that really makes people want to go beyond. They get caught up in the magic of the whole thing. I mean, it was very special.
Let's fast forward. So stepping into your role as chief executive, and your games were the Tokyo Games that you were actively involved with. Tell us about your role there and some of the challenges that you faced in Tokyo.
Yeah, so I think Tokyo was a huge challenge. I remember as we went into the pandemic, as it was for everybody, that sort of uncertainty about what was going to happen. I mean, every single person faced that in their own lives. I think there was a pretty good recognition at the same time that when something like that happens, sport is a secondary thing. And I think our athletes were brilliant in that they found ways to to deal with it, and their resilience came through very strongly. And it was challenging for them, but there was also a recognition that there were people on the front line whose time was much, much more difficult than theirs was at that time. But it was a difficult time. But it was also in many ways a very sort of enriching time, because everyone pulled together in such an incredible way. The athletes showed incredible resilience in terms of dealing with the uncertainty and continuing to find ways to train. The whole system, the whole UK sports system, came together brilliantly. It was, with Catherine Granger at the top of it, and everyone just really pulling together in a fantastic way. So we were very, very fortunate in those ways. And there were great stories of people being clever and innovative about how they train. We had a member of the shooting team who needed a 10-meter range to train on, and he was at home and he didn't have a 10-meter range. So he realized if he sat in his wheelchair in the bathroom, opened the door to his bedroom, still wasn't quite long enough. So he put a hole in his bedroom wall and built a connection through to his shed. And on the far wall of his shed was 10 meters. So that was his range. And so it was stories like that were just popping up, and it was just a fantastic time in that sense for people to keep going despite everything.
And what impact did it have on your role during that pandemic period and your leadership in helping the athletes and the coaches to prepare?
So I think, the first thing we were really clear about was that top priority for everybody, it's not just the athletes, but for everyone, was their well-being. And so it was very much a time of looking out for one another, and making sure that we were getting the messaging right, and that we were prioritizing on the right thing. And but essentially we had to start again. So we had to throw the old plans out of the window and literally start again. And so the question was, how do you take 500 people to Tokyo in the middle of a pandemic? And this was, of course, at a time where we didn't know the games were going to happen. We hoped they would, but after a certain time they were delayed by a year. The announcement came, and at least that gave us some kind of certainty in terms of the planning. But we went through it line by line, and we thought, well, what do we have to do in order to get the team there safely, get them back again? And safety was the number one concern. Performance was great, but actually it was all about how do we make sure everyone is safe when they go there, and safe when they safely can come back again.
And what are your best memories of the Tokyo Games that you were involved with?
There are so many. I think on the one hand, it's that feeling of relief and pride in the team, but relief that we were able to take 500 people to Tokyo and get them back home again safely in the middle of a pandemic. It's also one of gratitude to all those people that made that happen. It was a huge, huge team of people that made that happen, and the people of Japan, really, who by that stage were just very worried about the world coming to Tokyo, and what that might mean for them. But the incredible hospitality that we had out there. But I think the feeling that we had, because there were no families, and there were no supporters, and I think for Paralympic athletes in particular, that's a huge thing. Their families are so much part of who they are and their success, and they're always there supporting them. And so for not to be able to have your family there with you was a big thing. So I felt, there was a very small team of us there. I felt very responsible to get out there and support as many of them as we possibly could. So it was an incredibly successful time for Paralympics GB. We won medals in 18 of the 19 sports that were out there, and it was, and that's something no country had ever done before. It broke all the records, and there were some incredible performances that I was just so very lucky to be able to watch, and to be able to witness. The the rugby team, who won our first ever gold medal in wheelchair rugby, and beating the US in the final was a huge moment. Standing in the rain, watching Sarah Storey become Britain's greatest Paralympian, was a pretty special moment as well. I think for me personally, there's a very good friend of mine called Richard Whitehead, who won a gold medal in the 200 meters in London. And I was very fortunate to be sitting there with his mum and dad in London and his fiancée at the time, and see him storm through to a gold medal in London. And also to be there with his mum and dad in Rio 4 years later and see him do the same thing. And so I think for me to see Richard run his race, and actually he didn't win. He got pipped on the line, and came second and got a silver medal. But he was beaten by a young South African who he had been mentoring during his winter training down in Cape Town for the last few years. And in a way that said it all for me. That was a moment where the baton was being passed from one generation to another. Richard was already over 40 years old when he ran that race. He is an incredible athlete, but the respect that I could see between those two, and that special moment, I saw Richard walking off the track with a Union Jack around his shoulders. That must have been a very special moment for him as well. But so I think for me, just being able to be there and to witness that and to see that happen was very special.
We're now approaching the Paris 2024 Games, and one of the things that the organising committee have talked about is the equality in terms of gender for athletes taking part. But an issue that hasn't been talked about very much is coaches and the underrepresentation of women in coaching teams. How do we start to address that underrepresentation issue so women are able to step forward to help the development of elite athletes?
I think it's a really good question. And I mean, I think it's fair to say it's always good, I think, to acknowledge what has been done and the steps that have been done. And I think huge steps are being taken in women's sport generally at the moment. And there are now more role models of women in very senior leadership positions in coaching that younger girls and women can aspire to, which is what's necessary, of course. In many of these cases, there's still a way to go, but I'm quite positive that there's a sort of groundswell now of support for women's sport generally, and I think the coaching will follow.
And we're certainly seeing that not only in athletics, but in football and many
Absolutely.
other games that
Absolutely.
women's sport is reaching parity. What are some of the steps that maybe professional bodies can take beyond that process of starting at grassroots to really encourage women into those elite roles, elite development roles?
I mean, I think it's a question of getting role models out there so that people can aspire to it, and whether that's women or different people from different ethnic backgrounds. If you don't have someone in those roles, you can't see yourself as doing that possibly at some time in the future. And that's the most important thing, is just to get more people into those senior roles. And and some sports are much better than others. So that 50-50 representation is an incredibly important step. Some sports are way above that and some are way below that. And so some still have a long way to go. And the Paralympics is still a little bit behind where the Olympics is, but it's catching.
And when you think about your own development post being the chief executive, you have stepped into professional development and into executive coaching. You're very active in that area. You've got a master's degree, professional qualifications in coaching. What are some of the challenges that you see leaders experiencing in this post-pandemic hybrid world?
The thing I see with the people that I'm working with, and more generally, is, and I think it's the pandemic has really brought this out, is a desire for purpose. And the coaching that I'm doing, a lot of the coaching that I'm doing is working with leaders that want to bring more purpose into their leadership, and they want to connect more strongly with their purpose and the purpose of others, and the system that they're part of. And I think that's a theme that I'm seeing coming through time and again in the coaching that I'm doing. And so my particular interest is working with leaders who want to be more conscious about their leadership, clearer about the intent of their leadership, and what brings them, their motivation for leadership, and what's the impact they want to have, what's the shadow they want to cast. That's coming through quite strongly.
And how can leaders think about those things that you've just been mentioned? How can they think about their mission? How do they think about their purpose? How can you help them to explore their values and, using your phrase, the shadow that they're casting across the wider system in which they are a key player?
In practice, what we find is we spend a lot of time exploring in the coaching that I do, a lot of time sort of searching around in the undergrowth together. And sometimes it sort of leads to a dead end, but sometimes you get that moment of, and it's often where you come up against a belief or some kind of certainty that's been a bedrock of that person's life from a very, very early age. And there's that realization that, yes, that belief might have helped them to get to where they've got to and been part of their success, but perhaps it's limiting them somehow. Perhaps it's limiting them to get to the next level. It can be quite scary. It can be, because you are challenging those things to which you've held true, and that can be quite a scary thing. You almost, as a coach, you're encouraging someone to move towards what scares them, and as we know, it's our light, not our darkness, that scares us most.
It's a really interesting insight. And as you think about that coaching relationship, one thing that you've not touched upon, but you've implied, is the aspect around resilience. I guess resilience is really important for athletes to keep going after defeat. It's important as well for leaders, as many of the things that are challenged, not only about themselves, but about the environments that are operating, are outside of their control. Tell us a little bit about the work that you can help to get people to think about being more resilient, developing that strength to keep going when stuff goes wrong.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I think resilience is something which is critical in today's world with the challenges that leaders face, and the need for resilience. I think it's something that can be quite difficult. I think it's something that doesn't just happen. I think you build resilience over time. Sometimes it can carry another side to it. So you can become very resilient, but in becoming resilient, you can maybe lose the ability to feel or to be able to express those feelings, because resilience in some people's minds is a question of sort of stiff upper lip and moving forward, and that's not necessarily helpful to anybody. So I think it's about helping people to see sometimes things happen, and it is often our interpretation of the story we tell ourselves about those things that are happening that creates the anxiety and the stress. If we can find a way to accept what's happened, but then think more about our own reaction to that, and I think that can help. That can be part of building resilience. Not taking things necessarily personally. I think that's a very important part of leadership. But just being there to not always to react, but to understand and to be aware of where you're reacting to something, and to be able in that moment really to be able to see what's happening for what it is, rather than necessarily what you feel it means about you. So that for me is part of it, but it is it's a difficult area.
And the other thing that I'm intrigued about, I guess, as I think of elite performers and the role of senior business leaders, is the idea that in both of those situations, individuals need to have a capacity to think about being the best version of themselves, competing against themselves, continuous improvement, continuous development. And sometimes that gets lost for senior leaders who reach a particular point in their career and can sit back. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think the good thing is that generally anyone that I find coming to me for coaching is unlikely to be the sort of leader that is sitting back, because I think the very fact that you're going to see a coach suggests that you're looking for ways to continue to improve. But yes, it certainly can be the case. It generally isn't the case in the coaching that I do for that reason, because people are looking to improve.
And last of all, before we close our conversation, maybe sharing a tip, a piece of advice about your leadership journey over the last 30 plus years that will help our listeners think about how they continue their professional development.
Well, I think the first thing to say is very little of my career has been planned. It's sort of happened, and I've always been quite surprised at the fun, exciting things that I've ended up doing. And so I think maybe that's one tip, is that it's good to have plans, but also it's good to be open to do what you're doing, and to be open to what comes along. I think it's always important to really enjoy what you're doing. I think if you can be passionate about whatever it is, find your purpose in it, then the chances are you'll do it well, and then the chances are that will lead to something else that you'll enjoy doing. I think that's, for me, the underlying thing is that there doesn't have to be a clearly defined plan right the way through. For me, though, the roles that, if I look back, that I feel particularly proud about are the ones where I felt that particular purpose, that deeper purpose of what it is that they mean, what it's doing, why is that important?
So have a purpose, stay open to possibilities, and love what you do.
Perfect.
As you're looking forward to 2024 and the Paris Paralympic Games, just starting now, what's exciting you most about what we're about to witness?
It's going to be a great Games. It's going to be a fantastic Games. It always is. There's something so special about the Summer Paralympic Games in particular, but the winter as well. What's great is that there are not a lot of our great Paralympic athletes are out there again, and they will put in some more fantastic performances. What's also great is that there'll be a lot of new stars coming, and we don't yet, of course, know who they will be. There will be incredible sport, and they will continue to completely blow us away, as they always do. And we will, and so I think for me, it's just being able to. I'm going to go out there for a few days, catch up with lots of friends, but just to be able to see Paralympic sport again for a few days is what I'm looking forward to.
And who should we look out for?
All of them. I'm not going to mention any particular names, but there's a lot of them who I know are going to do very, very well.
Mike, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.